In November 1939, Joseph Stalin issued a terrifying statement. "I order the troops to march over the border and crush the Finnish forces once and for all. The city of Leningrad must be secured, it is the cradle of the proletarian revolution." Moments after speaking these words, a Soviet army of 400,000 men, thousands of tanks, planes and heavy artillery was mobilized to conquer Finland. From this date, the Nordic country entered into combat and would not have respite until 1945, when the Second World War ended. The history of Finland during these years is extremely remarkable, as it was one of the few nations north of Germany that was not subdued by the Nazis. On the other hand, and despite the harshness of the confrontations, it was not dominated by the Soviet Union either. It is amazing that such a small country, with less than 4 million inhabitants and scarce resources, managed to successfully resist against the Third Reich and the communist forces. But how did they do it? Join us in a new episode of Military History. To understand this story, we have to go back to the 19th century, a time when Finland was part of Russia. The Tsarist Empire had always been a dangerous neighbor, eager to subdue the Finns. However, in 1917, things changed thanks to the Bolshevik Revolution. In this chaotic context, the Finns finally saw the opportunity to declare their freedom and found an independent republic. But this calm would not last long, since, with the outbreak of the Second World War, all European nations faced terrible dilemmas, and Finland was not an exception. Hitler had violated the Versailles Treaty and begun rearming the Third Reich, preparing for battle. Meanwhile, Stalin was convinced that the Nazis would try to attack the Soviet Union, and to do so they would cross the Karelian Isthmus, a narrow strip of land that separates Lake Ladoga from the Gulf of Finland. If the Führer occupied it, from there he could move to the city of Leningrad without difficulty. The Soviets pressured the Finnish government to install military bases on its territory, move the border limits and break relations with Germany. In exchange, they offered the help of the Red Army should they need to defend themselves against the Nazis. For Finland, proud of its freedom, this was a humiliation, so they flatly refused to sign the treaty. That was how Stalin, faced with the stubbornness of the neighboring country, sent a gigantic army to take it by force. In November 1939, the Winter War began, in which Finland resisted the Soviet invasion with fire and blood. A veteran of the conflict recalled with these words the general feeling of the population. Throughout the country there was apprehension. Nobody thought about their own destiny. It was the future of the entire nation that was on our minds. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland, thousands of men joined the army to defend their homeland, even though victory seemed impossible. The communist forces vastly outnumbered them, as the Finns had just over 300,000 soldiers, 32 tanks, and 110 planes. The only way to beat the Red Army was through strategy. The northern weather was merciless, and the temperature had dropped to 40 degrees Celsius. The resistance knew how to make this an advantage and deployed tactics in which its soldiers, camouflaged in white and moving on skis, carried out lightning attacks on the Soviets. They immediately disappeared into the woods, making it impossible to hunt them down. For their part, the communists did not have the proper equipment, their clothing did not protect them from the cold, and thousands of troops froze to death. Stalin's surprise was enormous, as he had assumed that Finland would be quickly defeated. He was forced to double his troops, and in February 1940 he was victorious, though it cost him enormous sacrifices. By the end of the conflict, the Soviet Union had lost 140,000 men, 500 tanks, and 260 aircraft. Finnish casualties were much lower, they had 50,000 dead, 20 tanks destroyed and 60 planes shot down. Both nations signed a peace treaty establishing that the defeated had to surrender 10% of their territory, although they maintained their sovereignty. The Winter War generated great repercussions, as Hitler noticed that the Red Army was not as powerful as it appeared. Following this, he launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. This time, Finland allied with the Third Reich, partly as revenge for what had happened before, and helped fight the communist nation. The campaign was called the Continuation War, and during the offensive the Finns recaptured all lost territory and advanced to within 30 kilometers of the city of Leningrad. Thereafter, the battlefront stabilized for a few years, and in 1944 the Russians expelled the aggressors. Everything concluded thanks to a diplomatic agreement between the Soviet Union and Finland in September 1944. The treaty they signed stipulated as an exclusive condition that the Finns had to expel or disarm any German who was on their soil. Thus, the country broke its alliance with the Third Reich and began a new war, the Lapland War. At first, both Finland and Germany wanted to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, so an orderly withdrawal of German troops was negotiated. However, the Soviets pressured the Finnish army to attack the Nazi forces. The Third Reich responded by launching Operation Berk, with which it tried to occupy Lapland, the northern region of the country, of strategic interest for its nickel mines. For 7 months, Germany and Finland engaged in a series of small-scale battles. In total, around 200,000 men fought on the German side and 75,000 on the Finnish side. The losses were not as terrible as in the previous wars, since the Third Reich suffered 4,300 casualties, and their enemies 3,900. The Soviets' involvement in this conflict was minor, limited to providing air support and invading northwestern Lapland. However, although the death toll was low, the material damage was immense, and the Finns suffered for many years. In the Lapland War, the Germans applied a scorched earth strategy to Finland. They set out to destroy as much infrastructure as possible. They mined and blew up bridges, roads, factories, and homes, ordering the demolition of government buildings, burning villages, and bombing entire industrial zones. 100,000 civilians were displaced from their homes and became refugees and, on the other hand, the herds of reindeer, a fundamental animal for the local economy, were reduced. Finally, the Finnish army was victorious, and the last Nazis withdrew from the country in April 1945. In this way, after 6 years of death and destruction, Finland reaffirmed its status as an independent country and, despite the difficulties, preserved its freedom and successfully resisted the two great powers of the time, the Nazi Empire and the Soviet Union. Do you think that, in 1939, Finland should have formed an alliance with the Soviet Union to avoid war? Leave your answer in the comment box below and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.